All right. So welcome everyone to our January PTA meeting, the first one of 2024. Woohoo! Our agenda today, we are going to start off with the principals update. Joanne has joined us. Thank you, Joanne. And then she'll give us both the principals update as well as the CHS renovation update on what's the latest and greatest going on there. Nick will provide us with a budget update. We will get an update on the teacher and student grants from Rosemary and then Ilka. And then we have a very special guest, Albert, and I'm going to not say your last name right, Albert. I apologize. Roboto? Is that right?
Close.
Okay. Roboto. Okay. Roboto, who actually does fundraising for Virginia Tech. And we know that we have got more requests than we've ever had this year, and we're anticipating that will continue. And we also know that our coffers are low. And so Rima and I met with him just yesterday just to talk about ideas he had for things we could do, to just ideas on how we could really light a fire under our fundraising. It was a great conversation. And so he agreed to join us and review some of those ideas with the crew here. And then after that, we can kind of talk about, what are our goals and what do we want to do to kick off the 24 to 25 or however we want to define it, campaign. And then if we do have time, I would like to talk about the setting up the board for success next year. And so talking about like who's staying, who's leaving, and then start putting plans together for recruiting members so that we at least have some time for mentorship and stuff before the next year begins. So that is the agenda. Any pressing topics folks want to make sure we add to that before we get started with the principals update? All right. With that, Joanne, if you wouldn't mind taking it away. Unmute yourself.
All right. Okay, so I guess if we're ready to go with my update.
Ready, yep.
So again, I hope everyone is safe and warm. We've been fortunate that the two very old elm trees in our tree strip have not budged. So I'm very happy with that. I always have a talk with the trees when there's a storm. And our very old school is actually doing weathering the storm well. So this we do have our head custodian goes to the school every day. So the school has had electricity. The heat is working, and we do not have any burst pipes. So I'll get another update from him tomorrow, as this melt could impact the status of our building. As you may know, PPS has already put out the announcement that there's no school tomorrow. And so I've gotten an email. So speaking of like timelines, I've got an email from a parent wondering about finals, and most likely we're not going to change like the semester calendar, right? Like the first semester will end when it would have ended. And so for us, that is Friday. The last day of finals is Friday, January 26th. And then on Monday, January 29th, the teachers will have a grading day to finalize their grades. And then on January 30th will be the start of the second semester. The second semester has fewer calendar impacts from making up the days from the teacher strike. Though I cannot report to you tonight what the plan is to make up these snow days. I will say, as reported in Oregon Live, the district can go to the state for a waiver for these days, because we've already slotted in like the snow makeup days as days to make up instructional time from the teacher strike. Right, so that our school year is already extended. Right. And so PPS has not made an announcement one way or another about how they're going to approach making up these snow days. Any additions to the calendar have to involve the teachers union. So adding days onto June would involve a conversation with the teachers union. And just my personal opinion, I don't think we're going to go that route. But PPS will announce what path we're going to take to make up this instructional time. And what I'm going to say about finals is that, obviously our teachers know we've been out, and so they will make adjustments accordingly about whatever final assessments they're doing with students to get them ready for the second semester. Knowing that, these grades are of import to students because it's the semester grades that actually land on a student's transcript. So those go towards calculation of GPA and awarding of credit. And so certainly once I know anything, we'll communicate that out. One of the things that we still need to communicate out is actually what our calendar for the second semester will be, because we'll have an impact to the A-B rotation schedule. And I'm not sure if the number of flex periods will be adjusted in response to these snow days. But just know that our calendar, as far as I know, like the calendar that we have to the end of January is the calendar that we're following. And as a school on a rotating A and B schedule, so if we come back to school on Friday, Friday's a B day because it was supposed to be a B day, right? We don't kind of do a reset. And then that means the Monday and Tuesday would be an A and a B day, and then move on into the final schedule. Any other events that we had scheduled? So for instance, we were supposed to have a winter jazz festival. There were some basketball games. Those will all be rescheduled. And then, websites, Trivery, our social media will be updated about when those makeup games will be. When the school is closed, that also closes any of the CUBs, which is called the civil use of building. And I think JJ's on this call. She's very familiar with those. So when the building's closed, the building's closed. So like the head custodian goes in, he updates me, but we don't have any events at the school. So there won't be any events at the school tomorrow. Those will all be canceled. And so that included, we were going to meet
in progress.
Comprehensive Planning Committee for Modernization tomorrow evening, which I think will also be rescheduled. So what I'm going to say is that, look, because we've had these, we didn't have the war, it's like, okay, Mother Nature is doing what Mother Nature is going to do, right? So just be aware that we'll update as soon as we know anything. We'll update calendars on the website, on our Trivery app, and on our social media, so people know what is going on. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the email that I sent about the incident that happened at the school before we went away for the weekend, which involves some they were hand lettered on notebook paper, signs that were put above a water fountain in the science wing of the third floor of our school, where one of the signs said the word colored above one water fountain and the word whites above another water fountain. I made a PA announcement to the students because they also directly received an email. They received the same email that I sent to families with an initial little blurb from me, right? And so I really want us to think about, as I said in my PA announcement, how we're showing up as allies in the building if we identify as white. And also think about how we post things on social media. Because one of the first responses that happened were pictures and video taken of the signs and then sent out and posted, right? Even before any adult staff in the building were notified. We will, it is an active investigation. But as with some incidents that have happened at the school in the past, we may not ever find out which student did this. Or we might find out next school year, right? And I think sometimes people have a feeling of we want to find out who did it so that person can be held accountable, right? But I want us to also focus on like the impact that such actions take and conversations that we can have with our own students, and kind of where they're feeling, where they're situated in, what's happening at the school, knowing that there'll be conversations that have already happened in classes and conversations that will continue at Cleveland High School. I had, really nice interaction with a student in the hallway after I made the PA announcement. That was very reflective. And so I think we also want to keep in mind that our students are teenagers, right? They're trying to figure things out. Sometimes they want to be provocative, right? Sometimes they want to see what they can get away with. And that's the nature of working with teenagers. But I also know that we're a very caring community. And as I asked the students and the staff, is that it should also give us pause for reflection about how we're showing up together when we're in Cleveland High School together. And so if you have any questions, I can say that again, we haven't, we're definitely, questioning students. We're going to try to figure out what's going on, getting a pulse on social media. There's a particular TikTok channel as an example, it's called CHS Slander, that posts some memes around teachers and things that happen at the school that aren't exactly nice or flattering. And so I think, I'm hesitating because I think when I think about some of the conversations that happen on social media, are they really conversations? We can't control what students post, right? On their own social media or on their own TikTok channels. But I think these are conversations that we can have with our students about how they're showing up, not only at Cleveland High School, but how they're showing up for their friends, for their family, and just in the space, and then maybe what supports they need to feel like they're part of a community. And certainly, when something like this happens, I'm in immediate contact with our students and staff of color. And I usually talk to them first before I even send any communication out to the broader public. And I'm going to say again, if anyone knows anything, reach out to a trusted adult so we can work with the student as well that did this particular racist act at Cleveland High School. And it was a heavy, I have to say it was a heavy thing to lead into Martin Luther King Day weekend, not knowing it was going to become such an extended time off from the school. And I think that may lead me into a segue about how we're approaching the modernization of Cleveland High School. And that is listening to the voices in our community that aren't always, at the forefront, that aren't maybe always heard. And so as part of that process, a contract was granted to Malum Architects. So that's MAHLUM. Their offices are located in Southeast Portland. They're on Southeast 9th. And they have subcontracted out to a community outreach group called After Bruce. So I welcome you to look up the work of After Bruce. And they're the group that's collecting information from the community besides what's being collected from the Comprehensive Planning Committee and our community workshops. And after Bruce is interviewing stakeholders, like for instance, they've already interviewed me. They're interviewing our advisors of our racial affinity groups at the school. They're starting to reach out to students. And so the next kind of real piece of outreach will be more broadly to students to really surface what are those values that we want to see represented in a school building that, like the current Cleveland High School, is to be, to be there for 100 years, right? I think sometimes it's hard for us to think about that stretch of time, right? 100 years. What's school going to look like, right? What's Southeast Portland going to look like? How can we create a building that is, celebrates the community that is, Southeast Portland? And so that's a big part of the design process, right? Now, technically, where we are in the design process is that there is a comprehensive planning committee made up of community members, teaching staff, and then obviously the architects, and then we have a project manager whose name is Eric Girding, and he happens to be a Cleveland High School alum as well. And what that committee has been looking at is how do we maybe best use the properties that are already under control of Portland Public Schools. Now, there was an article that was written in Oregonian Live, and I know that maybe some of you have heard about the property that is the Fred Meyer property, right? And maybe if we could acquire that property, which is much bigger than the property we have now, wouldn't that be maybe a great place to, build a school? Well, that property is not for sale. And so one of the aspects that's been brought forth by the architects is that, hey, we're going to work with, here are the properties that Portland Public Schools has, right? And so those properties include a 1 acre parking lot. So that's the parking lot that is on 26. They're kind of behind the Burgerville, which is a little side note, is a staff parking lot. Okay. Right. So then the main building, most of that, the main part of the structure was built in 1929. That's the historic part of the structure. And then we have additions, the east wing and the gym that were done in the 50s and the 60s. That area that from like 26 to 28, Franklin to Powell, that's 4.5 acres. And then we have the property that is where our field is, and that's 6.5 acres. And that property will also be part of the modernization process. So what's been happening is receiving feedback about ideas about how we can best use those properties. So for instance, do we build on the parking lot? And if so, what classrooms or facilities do we put in the building on the parking lot? How can we best use the acreage that we have at the stadium? Because I'll have to say, it's not super well utilized. There are more things that could go there that would support athletics and our PE programs at Cleveland High School. So those are those really broad questions, and broad questions like, do we want to have a total rebuild, like you tear down the building and you build all new, or do we want to preserve parts of the historic building, right? Questions about how much open space do we want to have? There's not a lot of what qualifies as open space, and I'm going to say useful open space on the main school site right now. There is a bit of a setback from Powell, and then we have these interior courtyards that aren't accessible. And then we have a bit of a setback off of Southeast Franklin. And then, to be honest with you, our loading dock area is also considered an open space. And the space that we call the breezeway, that's where our portables are, and that leads to the east wing, is an open space. And so kind of trying to measure the community value about, hey, do we want to stay low and have less open space? Do we want to go higher and have more open space? Do we just want to build on the 4.5 acres where the school is now? Or do we also want to build on the parking lot acreage? So those are some of the questions that are being brought to the committee and to the public and to the staff to see where we're falling for those broad statements. And what the comprehensive planning committee does, it's not down to the design phase yet of what individual classrooms will look like, how many classrooms we'll have. It's more those broad questions. But we need to be able to bring a plan to the school board to say, hey, this is what the Cleveland High School community would like to do, right? And this is how much we estimate it. And then I have to say, money is part of it. This is how much money would be estimated for this kind of modernization. And then that is still targeted to be in March. So going to the school board in March with like the broad plan. When I say the broad plan, how do we use our property? Are we all new build? Are we preserving any of the historic, open space, height, those kinds of questions, okay? Then the project will move into what's called the design phase, and there'll be another committee that will be formed called the Design Advisory Group, or the DAG. And so then there'll be information put out to the community, like apply to be on the DAG. And at the DAG phase is when we're getting down to the nitty gritty of the design of individual classrooms and spaces and common spaces and where we're going to put things and where the entrance is going to be, those particulars. I also want you to know that staff and students, regardless of them being on the DAG, they don't need to be on the DAG to be part of this process, right? So teachers that teach some of our real specialized programs, like our CTE programs, that's college technical programs, like our culinary program, for instance, our carpentry program, like those teachers will be, part of the process about what their space needs to be for their curriculum and for that CTE program. Our visual and performing arts teachers will also be very intimately involved in the theater design and what that space needs to be and how much space they need and where they'd like to be located and the kind of needs they have. Our visual arts too, like the studios and the supporting our ceramics program. So all of those individual groups will be, they'll be part of the process in designing. And the other guiding document that's part of this process is called the Ed Specs. So in the Ed Specs, that's a pretty hefty document that just talks about, hey, when we have a comprehensive school in Portland Public Schools, we want it to have classrooms that are about a certain size, which, by the way, are bigger than what we have currently in Cleveland High School, right? We need to have a certain number of common spaces. We need to have, this is what we need to have cafeteria. It's like it's setting that baseline of what all comprehensive high schools should have. And then the community in the design process, I think to me, that's what like brings that, like the school alive, what the school is going to look like. So it's a very exciting process. We've had some timeline ourselves with our processes. There've been some timeline issues. When I say timeline issues, like we're not going to be able to meet tomorrow night. We had to push back some meetings because of the strike, but we're still moving along. I'm on that committee, the Comprehensive Planning Committee. I'll also be on the DAG, and I meet with the architects and the project director weekly as well. And so we have a link on our main website that is about the modernization project. And then you can see the slides, you can see the feedback that people are giving, you can see where we are in the process. And anyone is invited to any of the meetings that we have. For a comprehensive planning committee meeting, your observers, but for the community workshops, those are to get feedback from the community. And we already had one of those workshops on a Saturday, and we had really pretty healthy participation. And we're supposed to have one, and I think we're, I'll find out from Eric maybe tomorrow. I'll touch bases with him. We're scheduled to have one of these on Saturday. I think the weather permitting, we'll go ahead and have it. So it'll be Saturday morning for a couple of hours. We meet in the cafeteria, but all the architects are there. After Bruce is there with the community outreach. So the community gets to see where we are in the process and then give their feedback, which is very helpful. And so I want to say that is as much feedback as we can give our planning committee and the architects, the better our school is going to turn out to be. And I think finally, I want to wrap up. There have been questions at many of the meetings about timeline. Like, what's the timeline for all of this? Okay, so timeline again, towards the end of March, going to the board with a comprehensive plan. Hey, Cleveland is going to build on this property. It's going to be all new build, or it's going to be a partial new build. You know what I'm saying? A partial new build. It's going to be about this much money. We need to, we want to make a proposal to go to the voters in November of 2024. So we have to go to the voters in November of 2024 to get a bond approved to fund this project. Okay. And so I would encourage you to reach out to board members in support of our project. There are 2 high schools that are left to be modernized, and that is Cleveland High School and Ida B. Wells. And this has been part of a really a long range project for Portland Public Schools to modernize all of our high schools. And I think it's really important, not only for our community, for our students to follow through on these projects. And so outreach to the school board to encourage them to support the project, encourage them to make sure, because it's the school board that's going to vote about whether or not we even go put a bond measure up to the voters, right? And without that bond measure, that's our funding stream to get the school modernized. I've often said about our school is like, it's like what's exciting about our school is what happens in our school and in our classrooms. It's not the, I'm going to say kind of dingy stairwells and not enough natural light, but I personally feel that creating a learning environment that brings in light, that brings in nature and elevates the values of the community really has an impact on student learning. So I think this is something I want our whole community to get behind, and so that we don't lose momentum. Back in, for those of us who've been around, and I was like, sometimes I think it's like, man, I think I may have been in Portland Public Schools too long. But back in 2012, the Portland Public Schools put up a bond measure that failed, right? So they learned, they have lessons learned. So they feel confident. People I talk to from communications and the project managers and the architects, when we put up a bond, it's a bond to be approved so we can move forward with the vision for our school. And even though your student might not graduate from the new building, your student who's currently there can impact what that vision will be. And I think that's really exciting. All right, I think that's it. And of course, I'm open for questions. And if you can't think of any questions right now, my email is jwatkins@pps.net.
I have a few. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, Joanne. This is Amy Shaken. So nice to see you. Although I'm staying off line for I took snow day to heart today. Let's just put it that way. But thank you so much again for joining and for the awesome update. I actually, when this happens, of course, snow days, like tons of people are texting each other, lots of parents. And one of the questions that sort of came up in a couple of my kind of group chats today is the question about whether CHS has explored moving into online school after like one snow day, heading into the second one, or definitely after the second one. Is that something that's been discussed, or I'll just kind of leave it there?
So, okay. And we actually had a parent send an email to the district inquiring, hey, can we just go to online learning? Because we've already done online learning. But I'm going to say this, when you have a big system and you have to consider the needs of every student and every teacher, right? So there are students that don't have devices maybe right now because they don't have their devices at home, or they're people without electricity, or the teachers, like in order for the teachers to set up their lessons online, that's actually not kind of a quick thing to do. So they can update their Canvas pages to make students aware of like things they can be working on. And then we're not, you know, for some of our community, I mean, one of the things that we did during distance learning is Portland Public Schools lent out so many hotspots so people could have internet so they could access their classes. Right. And so, I mean, I'm with you. I would hope that we would maybe come to a time where, okay, if this happens, there's that we can go to distance learning, but I'm going to say right now, not there yet. Right.
Gotcha. I mean, it just seems like a priority to help get, you know, as weather is changing and we seem to have these prolonged ice storms every year now. Hopefully we can get there. The other thing that I know was brought up before, but could you remind me and possibly others, what is happening for juniors around the SAT this year and or alternatives to that test? I know there was like ACT, everyone was doing that.
Yeah. So, okay. So the state shifted about what tests they wanted to support for our sophomore. So that's in the fall. And so what we gave was the pre-ACT. We did not give the PSAT. But in the spring, March 20th, actually, we are going to give the SAT. Right? And that SAT is going to be given to juniors. At this time, I do not think there's any plan to system-wide give the PSAT to students to qualify for the National Merit Scholarship Program.
Gotcha. Thanks for that confirmation and for the other feedback. Appreciate it.
Does that mean students need to go find a PSAT testing someplace else? Is that what we're saying? Okay.
That's unfortunate because that seems like a huge equity concern right there. But that's, you know, because there's some good scholarship money to come out of PSAT national merit stuff. So who do we contact at the district to? Is that a district or is that a state level?
The pre-ACT, that was a state level decision.
Okay, but but to not give the PSAT,
that's also
the juniors. I mean, that's a state level.
Yes.
Okay. That's something I feel like the PTA could rally again about, because that's
JJ, send me an email and then I'll find that. Oh, I'm saying that. Yeah, send me an email.
Sorry. Okay.
I'll get you the email addresses that we need to contact. Okay.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
I also think you could get a handful of students on board with like petitioning to get it back to the PSAT, just because it makes no sense that you take the PACT as a sophomore, then are forced to take the SAT as a junior with no practice. It makes no sense whatsoever.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Is there a forum for giving that feedback?
That's what I'm saying. Is like, if I'll get the contacts that we need to reach out to, which I think will be both state and district level.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I missed that.
And
thanks again, Joanne.
Joanne, why do you think the decision was even made to do the pre-ACT? what was the benefit there besides, is it just a cost thing, or what was the reasoning at all? Do you know?
I don't, you know what, Susie, I don't know, right? And then I think there was an article and have also been editorials in the New York Times around standardized tests. So during the pandemic and after the pandemic, colleges moved away from absolutely requiring an ACT or an SAT. But that may have been short-sighted. Now, I mean, when you think like right, and because there's information that those tests give regardless of which school you go to, right? About college preparedness. And what Lauren's saying is like, for students, like, how does it make sense that we're doing a pre-ACT, but then in the spring we're doing an SAT? Like, quite frankly, what's our goal and I'm going to say this too, what's our goal in spending instructional time to give a standardized test to a group of students, right? That goal needs to be meaningful to families and more importantly, to students, right? And we need to be able to support that goal. Like, this is how this is going to help you, the student. And for me personally, is how can we use that data to inform instruction at the school? And I'm going to say this, maybe I shouldn't, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. I'm not sure Portland Public Schools has always really delved in how we're using that data and using that time for these standardized tests. I think it's because we didn't always used to do this. It used to be you found a testing center, you went and did it, or sometimes there were some schools that would give it on a Saturday. So I think it did open up an opportunity for all students. Like, you didn't have to, like, all students, you're going to sit down and you're going to take this test. So how can we now really leverage that move that we made around this testing?
Okay.
One other last thing on that. Could we get information, Joanne, in one of your letters to the families about that? Not how to maybe complain about it, but what they should be preparing for. Like, if a student wants to they can't take the PSAT because those are only offered through the schools, but perhaps they want to be aware that they're going to be taking the SAT. I don't know, just a little bit more information, because they might be, I would say families are going to be surprised that they took the pre-ACT. As a sophomore parent, I assumed they were going to be taking the ACT now. I don't know. As having a college kid who just went through it all, it's true. Those test scores I thought were very, but the scholarships weren't. So, and those only come with the PSAT. So I guess just maybe letting parents know so you don't hear so much backlash in March when the juniors take the SAT, and maybe what sophomores could do if there is a PSAT they could take, which I don't think there is. I don't think you can.
You can take it. You have to search for it, but you can take it at another high school that's offering it. But if no one in the state is offering it, then they can't. So that becomes an issue.
Yeah. So I just think an informational email should go out to students, Joanne, please. Thank you. Or to parents.
Okay. I got you, Rima.
All right. Any other questions for Joanne? Okay. Joanne, thank you so much for your wonderful updates. We really appreciate them very much.
All right. Well, thank you all. Again, it looks like I see your faces look somewhat happy and warm. And I see electricity, so that's good. And I'm really hoping we'll all be back in the school on Friday.
Thank you.